Frozen on the edge of nowhere, the wind howled like a hungry beast, tearing across the frozen wastelands of planet Thalara. Snow fell hard and fast. Covering the ground in white silence, each gust of wind stole warmth from the skin, biting deep into the bones in that cold, quiet hell. A figure stumbled through the snow, her arms clutching something close to her chest. She was thin, weak, and shaking, her breath short and sharp. Her clothes were torn, barely enough to cover her body. But she didn't care about herself. Wrapped tightly in the last piece of cloth she owned was her tiny child. No older than 2 seasons. The baby's skin had turned pale blue from the cold, and its tiny mouth no longer cried. She fell to her knees behind a broken tree, the only shelter for miles. Her legs had no strength left, her eyes were heavy, and her heart felt like stone. But she looked at her baby and forced herself to stay awake. "I'm sorry," she whispered in her alien tongue, holding her baby closer. "I tried," she said. Tears freezing on her cheeks, they had escaped from the camp 3 nights ago. The soldiers had burned her village, taken the strong, and left the weak to die. She had hidden her baby and ran. Now, they were far from the enemy, but also far from life. The snow covered her feet, then her legs, and then her back. She curled up, wrapping herself around her child like a living shield. Her fingers were numb, her lips blue. But she smiled through the pain. "At least we will sleep together," she whispered, closing her eyes. Her baby gave one last weak sound, almost like a sigh, then silence. Hours passed, the storm screamed above them, shaking the trees, but deep in the woods, someone else was moving. The man heard the crying wind and something more, something soft and strange beneath the snow's roar. He followed the sound, his boots crunching deep into the snow. He wore a thick coat, goggles, and a mask to fight the cold. He was human, tall, and wide, with a heavy backpack and a plasma lantern in hand. When he reached the broken tree, he almost missed them. They were buried halfway, 2 shapes covered in white, still as death. But then, a tiny cough, soft and weak, reached his ears. He dropped the lantern and ran forward, digging fast with his hands. His fingers touched frozen cloth, then skin, then something warm. "God," he muttered, pulling the small body out. It was a child, alien, but clearly dying. Then he found her, the mother, curled like a statue, unmoving. He touched her neck, searching for a pulse. Faint, but there. "Hang on," he whispered. "Don't you die." He wrapped them both in his emergency blanket, pulling the heater pack from his bag and pressing it close. Then he lifted them both at once and began the long walk back through the forest. The storm fought him, but he didn't stop. The woman didn't wake. Not even when he laid her near the fire inside his cabin. The baby stirred a little, crying. Softly, he gave the child a few drops of warm broth, just enough to bring color back to the tiny cheeks. He watched them for a long time, sitting by the fire. He had seen many things in this wild place: storms, beasts, silence that could drive a man mad. But nothing like this. A mother willing to freeze to death so her baby might live. He didn't know who she was or why she ran, but something inside him whispered, "You found them for a reason." As night fell, he checked the firewood, made sure the cabin stayed warm, and sat with a blanket over his shoulders. The alien woman still didn't move, her chest rising slow and shallow, but the baby now slept peacefully, curled in soft cloth. Beside her, he leaned back in his chair and whispered to the dark, "You're safe now." Outside, the wind still screamed, but inside, something had changed, something had survived. And that was the beginning of everything. The cabin stood alone in the heart of a cold forest. Hidden from the sky by tall, thick trees, smoke rose softly from the chimney, curling into the stormy air inside. Warmth and silence filled the room. broken only by the crackle of fire and the gentle breath of two lives saved from death. The man watched them from the corner of the room, sitting on a wooden stool. His face was rough, marked by years of survival and loss. He had seen war, he had seen death, but this was something else. A mother and her child, aliens, left to die in the cold. Why had the universe thrown them into his path? He stood up and walked to the fire, checking the heat and stirring the pot of stew. He hadn't spoken a word since bringing them in. Words felt too big for what he saw in the snow. A mother lying still, arms around her baby like she had chosen to freeze before letting go. The child moved first, a small whimper rising from its throat. It shifted under the blanket, eyes barely opening. The man knelt beside it and whispered, "You're all right now, little one." He offered a spoonful of warm liquid, and the child weakly sipped. Color began to return to its soft blue skin. Hours passed before the mother finally stirred. Her fingers twitched, her chest rose in a deeper breath, and her eyes fluttered open the moment she saw the wooden ceiling and strange firelight. She sat up fast, panic in her gaze. Her voice came sharp and broken in galactic tongue. Where is my child?" The man stood slowly, raising his hands to show peace. He pointed to the baby sleeping beside her. "Safe," he said calmly. She looked down, her eyes wide, then filled with tears. She grabbed her child and held it tight. Breathing fast, heart racing. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice shaking. "Human," he answered, tapping his chest. "Name's Carter." She stared at him, confused, frightened, and weak. Her body wanted to collapse again, but her fear kept her upright. Why? "Why help me?" she asked. Carter looked into her eyes and didn't answer right away. Instead, he poured hot broth into a bowl and offered it to her. She didn't take it at first, unsure if it was poison or trap, but her stomach growled, and her child needed her strong. With trembling fingers, she accepted the bowl. It was thick, salty, and strange. But it was warm. Warmth felt like a dream she had forgotten. "Storm's not stopping," Carter said, glancing at the window. "You'll need to stay till it clears." She didn't speak, only nodded, still holding her baby close. Carter watched them for a moment, then returned to the fire. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask where she came from. He had learned long ago when people run through snow with nothing but their child. They're not running for fun, they're running from monsters. As the fire burned brighter, she slowly relaxed. Her eyes never left Carter. Though every move he made, every sound he gave, she studied. Not with hate, but with deep, heavy caution. Her species had never trusted humans. She had never even spoken to one before. And yet, this man, this stranger, had pulled her from death, fed her child, and asked for nothing. Carter handed her a soft cloth and motioned toward the child. She understood, wiping her baby's face and wrapping it better. It felt strange to be cared for, stranger still. It felt safe. "You're not with the soldiers," she said finally, voice quiet. "No," Carter replied, his voice like gravel. "Haven't been with anyone in years. Why are you alone?" He didn't answer, just stared into the fire. That silence said more than words ever could. She didn't ask again. Instead, she looked down at her sleeping child, then at the wooden cabin, the warm fire, the food, for the first time in many nights. Her hands stopped shaking. She leaned back, slowly, resting her head against the wall, eyes growing heavy once more, before her dreams took her. She said softly, "My name is Valari." Carter looked over, nodded once. "Good to meet you." "Valari," he replied. Outside, the storm continued to scream, but inside that little cabin, something had shifted. Not just the cold, not just survival, something deeper. Two strangers from different worlds, one moment frozen in death, the next warming each other back to life. When Valari opened her eyes again, the light was softer. The storm outside had stopped, but snow still coated the window like a frozen curtain. The cabin was warm, too warm for someone who had almost died in the cold. For a moment, she panicked her. Heart raced. Her breath came fast. Where was she? Where was her child? Her head turned sharply, and there he was, her little one, bundled tightly in a thick blanket beside her. His tiny chest moved up and down in gentle sleep. His skin, once pale blue, now showed color again. She pressed her hand to his cheek, and it felt warm. Then she noticed the smell. Something rich, strange, cooking nearby. She looked across the room and saw him, the human, Carter. He stood near the small stove, stirring something in a black pot. His back was turned, his movements slow, quiet, but she could tell he knew. She was awake. Valari reached for the knife beside the bed, the one she had hidden under the blanket the night before. She gripped it tightly, her eyes locked on the man. He didn't move, didn't turn. Instead, he spoke in a calm voice. "Your child is safe, Valari," he said. "And so are you." She rose carefully from the bed, still weak but steady enough to stand. The knife pointed in his direction, her hands trembling only a little. "Why did you bring us here?" she asked, her voice rough and tired. Carter turned around slowly, showing his empty hands. He looked at her, not with anger or fear, but with something else, understanding, maybe even sorrow. "You were dying," he said. "I couldn't just leave you out there." Valari didn't lower the knife, not yet. She had seen too many lies, too many traps. "Humans don't help our kind," she said sharply. "Maybe not the ones you met." He answered, "But I'm not them." The room fell quiet, except for the low bubbling from the pot. Carter walked over to the table, slowly, and placed a metal bowl down. He pushed it toward her and stepped back, giving her space. "What is it?" she asked, eyes still watching him. "Stew," he replied, "from roots, dried meat, and snow water." Valari looked at it, then at her child. Her stomach growled quietly, reminding her how long it had been since her last real meal. She stepped forward slowly, took the bowl with one hand, the knife still in the other. She sniffed the food. It smelled strong, foreign, but not poisoned. Her first sip was cautious, her second, deeper. Warmth spread through her chest and belly. Tears came to her eyes before she could stop them. "I didn't mean to cry," she whispered, wiping her face with the back of her arm. "You don't have to explain," Carter said softly. "I've cried too, even in this room." She finally lowered the knife just a little. Her shoulders dropped, and she let out a long breath. He didn't try to come closer. He simply went back to the fire and stirred the stew again. "How long have we been here?" she asked. "2 nights," Carter replied. "You were unconscious most of the time, and you stayed to watch us." He nodded. "Didn't have anywhere else to be." Valari looked around the cabin, wooden walls, shelves with tools, herbs, strange weapons. It was a place built for one man to survive the world. And now she had entered that world with her child. "Why are you alone?" she asked quietly. He paused before answering. "Too many mistakes," he said. "Too many people lost." Valari didn't press. She knew that kind of silence, the kind that grows when grief becomes too big for words. She sat on the edge of the bed, the knife now resting on her lap. Carter handed her a second blanket and motioned toward the child. "He'll stay warm better with this." Valari took it and wrapped her son gently. He smiled in his sleep, his tiny hand reaching for her fingers. A soft laugh escaped her lips, tired, surprised, and full of life. Carter saw it and smiled too. Just a little, she noticed. And for the first time, she didn't feel fear in his presence. Not trust yet, but something new. Something like quiet peace. "I don't know how to thank you," Valari said softly. "You don't have to," Carter replied. "Just keep breathing, keep holding that boy." Outside, the snow had stopped, but the cold still ruled the land. Inside, however, the warmth between two strangers had begun to grow, and that warmth might be the only thing keeping them all alive. The fire in the cabin crackled softly, spreading warmth through the wooden walls. Snow still blanketed the world outside, hiding the trees, the sky, and all signs of danger inside. Two strangers sat across the room from each other, one human, one alien. A silent fire burning between them, not just from wood, but from something deeper, something slowly growing. Valari sat with her child in her arms, rocking him gently as he slept. Her eyes watched the flames, but her thoughts were on the man. This human, Carter, was unlike any she had imagined. He hadn't asked questions, hadn't expected thanks, he simply helped. Carter sat by the table, carving something from a piece of wood. His hands were steady, his focus quiet. Valari finally spoke, her voice low. "You're not afraid of me." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "No," he said. "Should I be?" "Most humans are," she replied, "or they pretend not to be, and then strike when we sleep." Carter let out a short breath, like half a laugh. "I've seen monsters on both sides," he said. "But I don't judge anyone by their skin." Valari looked down at her child, who slept without fear for the first time in days. She traced her fingers through his soft hair and whispered, "His name is Leo." Carter nodded. "Strong name." She smiled slightly, the kind of smile that appears without permission, then fades before it can grow. "What were you carving?" she asked, changing the subject. Carter lifted the piece of wood, revealing a small animal shapeward but full of care. "A toy," he said. For him, Valari blinked, surprised. "A toy?" "Yeah," Carter said, placing it near the sleeping child. "Figured he could use something to hold that isn't fear." She didn't answer, but her eyes softened. No one had ever done something like that, not even in her village, not since her mate had died, and certainly not from a stranger, especially a human. Later that evening, the child awoke with soft cries. Valari fed him from a bottle Carter had built from scraps and herbs. A strange mix, but it worked. The baby calmed quickly, his little hand reaching out, and then something happened. He laughed. It was small, short, but clear. Valari's heart skipped at the sound. It was the first time she had heard her son laugh since they fled. Even Carter looked up, surprised, his eyes shining a little. "He likes you," she said quietly. "He's got good taste," Carter replied, smiling. The room felt warmer. Though the fire hadn't grown, Valari stood, stretching slowly. Her body still ached, but her legs were stronger now. She walked over to the window and looked outside. The forest stood still, snow clinging to every branch. "Do you think they're still looking for us?" she asked. Carter didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked to the stove and added more wood to the fire. Then he said, "If they wanted you dead, they'd stop by now. But if they want the child, they'll never stop." Valari shivered, not from cold, but from memory. "They took everything," she said. "Burned our homes, hunted us like animals." Carter stared at the flames. "I know," he whispered. "I've seen it too." She looked at him sharply. "You were a soldier." "Was," he said. "A long time ago. Why did you stop?" "Because I started dreaming of fire, of screams, and couldn't breathe when I woke." Valari sat down again, her voice gentle. "You lost someone?" He nodded, not looking at her. "Everyone," he said. "Wife, child, friends." The silence after that felt sacred. Not awkward, not heavy, just real. Like two broken hearts recognizing each other in the quiet. "I thought I was the only one," she said. "You're not," Carter replied. "Not anymore." The fire popped, throwing sparks into the air. Leo reached for the little wooden toy and gripped it tight in his sleep. Valari brushed his forehead with her hand, her eyes full of something close to peace. Still guarded, still scared, but also something else. Carter stood and took 2 cups from the shelf. Pouring hot root tea into them, he offered one to Valari, who took it carefully. Their hands brushed for just a second, but it was enough. Enough to feel that the fire between them wasn't just from logs in flame. "Thank you," she said, holding the cup. He looked at her for a moment, then said, "We survive better when we're not alone." And that night, under the roof of a cabin built for one, 3 souls shared the warmth of a fire, each carrying pain, but also hope, and without even knowing it, something new had started. A fire between strangers that neither wanted to let die. Morning sunlight slipped through the small cracks in the wooden cabin walls. The storm had passed, and for the first time in many days, the air felt calm. Valari sat near the fire, gently brushing her fingers through Leo's soft hair. The child lay curled in a nest of blankets, his chest rising and falling peacefully. She watched him closely, as if afraid the calm was just a dream that might vanish any second. Carter stepped into the room from outside, carrying a small bundle of dry wood. His boots left snowy footprints on the floor, but his hands were steady. "Fire's holding," he said, placing the wood beside the hearth. Valari nodded, her voice soft. "He didn't cry once last night." "That's good," Carter replied. "He's strong." "He gets it from his father," she said, then paused, her eyes lowering. "He's gone." Carter didn't ask how or when. He just sat down on a wooden crate, rubbing his hands together to chase away the cold. He had learned when not to speak, and sometimes silence said more than words ever could. Leo stirred under the blankets, letting out a soft coo. Then, slowly, his eyes opened. Wide and curious, Valari leaned in, whispering his name. And that's when it happened. He smiled. Not just a small twitch, but a real smile, bright and pure. Valari gasped, tears rising to her eyes. "He smiled," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. Carter leaned over, watching, and couldn't help but smile too. "It's the first time since we ran," Valari said, brushing tears from her cheeks. "I thought he'd forgotten how." "Looks like he remembered," Carter said warmly. "And maybe it's the fire, or maybe it's you." Valari looked up, eyes shining. "No," she said, "it's something else." She turned her gaze to Carter and added, "He feels safe here." The man blinked, unsure what to say. He had lived in this cabin for years, always alone. Now the walls felt smaller, the air warmer, not just from the fire, but from the life that had entered with her and the child after breakfast. Carter reached into a drawer and pulled out the small wooden toy he had carved earlier. He handed it to Valari, who gently placed it into his tiny hands. The child grabbed it with joy and laughed again, a sound so sweet it filled the entire room with warmth. Carter watched them, a strange tightness in his chest. It had been years since he heard laughter in this place, years since he felt anything beyond survival. "He likes you," Valari said, watching Leo hold up the toy. "Maybe he sees something." "I don't," Carter replied, smiling awkwardly. "Maybe he sees someone who needs a smile," she said softly, outside. The snow began to melt slowly under the morning sun. Small drips of water fell from the roof, tapping against the windows. It was the kind of peace that never lasted on a planet like this, and Valari knew it. Later that day, she helped Carter gather more firewood. Her steps were still slow, but her strength had returned. They didn't talk much as they worked, but the silence between them felt easy now. Not cold, not tense, just quiet and shared. At one point, Valari turned and asked, "Why did you really save us?" Carter didn't look at her right away. He kept stacking the wood, then finally said, "Because I saw my past in your eyes." She tilted her head, unsure what he meant. "My wife died with our baby during the evacuation of Hades' outpost," he said, voice low. "They froze in a shelter waiting for rescue that never came." Valari stood still, Her breath caught. I was too far away. Carter continued, and by the time I returned, it was too late. Her eyes softened, and she took a small step toward him. You saved us. Because you couldn't save them, he nodded, not ashamed, not broken, just honest. Valari touched his arm lightly. Then maybe. Saving us saved you too. Carter looked at her, really looked. And for the first time since she arrived, he didn't just see a stranger or a refugee. He saw someone who had suffered, someone who had survived. Someone who understood. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, the three of them sat by the fire. Val, Ryer, Carter, and little Leo. The child played with a wooden toy, giggling. Softly, the flames danced in his wide, bright eyes. The warmth wasn't just from the fire anymore. It came from something invisible, yet strong. A bond forming quietly between people who had no reason to trust, but had chosen to anyway. And in that little cabin, tucked deep in the woods of a harsh world, the child smiled again. And so did the man who had forgotten how the cabin had become a home, at least for now. Leo played with his toy near the fire. Giggling and crawling from one blanket to another, Valari hummed softly while grinding herbs, showing Carter how her people used them to heal wounds and keep warm from the inside. Carter sat nearby, fixing a broken panel on his old solar heater. The air inside was peaceful, like a quiet breath before something big. Then came the sound, a distant rumble below. Mechanical. Carter's hands froze. Valari looked up quickly, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of engines. She ran to the window, brushing away the frost. There, beyond the trees, something was moving in the sky. A dark shape cutting through the clouds. Military patrol ship. She recognized the markings burned into its side. Her voice trembled. It's them. Carter didn't waste time. He grabbed a pair of binoculars and climbed the ladder to the lookout loft. The ship hovered low, scanning the forest with glowing beams. Recon patrol, he muttered. Standard. Search pattern. Valari was already bundling Leo in blankets, her hands shaking. They're looking for us, she whispered. They never stop. Carter came down quickly. Walking straight to the wall near his tool shelf, he pushed aside a heavy coat, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside were two weapons, old, but polished and ready. He handed Valari a small energy pistol. She stared at it, then at him. You're going to fight them. If they land. Yes, he said calmly. I'm not handing you or that boy over. Valari's voice dropped, full of pain. They'll burn the whole forest if they sense heat signatures. Then we turn the cabin cold, Carter said. Already shutting off the heater vents, the fire went out moments later, and the room darkened. Carter lit a heatless lantern that gave only dim blue light. We'll stay quiet, no movement. No light they can trace, he said. And if they come on foot. He held the rifle tighter. Leo whimpered softly, sensing the change. Valari cradled him close, whispering soft words in her native tongue. Carter peered through a narrow gap in the boards, eyes sharp and unblinking. The ship hovered for another minute, then slowly began to descend. They're landing, he said, about 100 meters out. Valari's breathing quickened. They'll track footprints, then we give them false ones. Carter replied, opening the door just long enough to toss a heat beacon far into the woods. It would give off just enough warmth to lure scanners away, but it was only a delay, not safety. Minutes crawled by, heavy and slow, outside. Boots crunched in the snow, multiple pairs. Valari crouched in the darkest corner of the cabin. Holding Leo against her chest, Carter stood by the window, rifle ready, eyes narrowed. He had been through ambushes, raids, and more. But this time, someone innocent was behind him. Someone who trusted him through the slits in the wood. Carter saw the shapes, 4 soldiers in dark armor, weapons drawn, scanning with visors. They moved slow, cautious. One of them pointed toward the trees. Probably picking up the false heat trail, they started moving away, following it deeper into the forest. For a moment, Carter let out a slow breath, but then one of the soldiers paused. Turning toward the cabin, he raised his hand, signaling the others to stop. Carter's grip tightened on the rifle. The soldier stepped forward alone, approaching the cabin slowly. Carter could hear Valari whispering prayers to Leo, her voice shaking but steady. The man outside reached the porch and raised a scanner. Pointing it at the walls, Carter knew the device it picked up heartbeats. No matter how quiet you were, he had seconds, maybe less. He opened the door slowly, silently, and stepped outside. The soldier turned sharply. Surprised, Carter raised his hands, calm and cold. "This is private land," he said. "You're not welcome here." The soldier lowered his scanner slightly. "We picked up signs of fugitives," he said. "You live alone." "Have for 5 years," Carter replied. "Check your records." The soldier hesitated, unsure. Carter kept his voice firm but casual. "You really think someone would hide fugitives out here, where the wolves don't even walk?" The soldier looked past him into the cabin, then back at his team. Finally, he lowered the scanner fully. "Next time, keep your signal blocker clean," he said. "We almost flagged you." Then he turned and walked off the porch, signaling his squad. Carter stood frozen until they disappeared into the trees. When he returned inside, Valari was still curled in the corner, holding her baby tight. Her eyes were wide, full of fear and something else. "You lead for us," she said, voice barely a whisper. "I protected my home," Carter said, kneeling beside her. "You and the kid. You're part of it now." And though the fire was out, the warmth between them burned stronger than ever before, because now they knew they weren't just surviving together, they were ready to fight for each other. The snow had stopped falling. The sky above the forest was clear for the first time in weeks. Golden light poured through the trees, touching the cabin's rooftop gently. Inside, everything was quiet, too quiet. Valari sat near the fire pit, rocking Leo gently in her arms. The fire hadn't been relit. Not yet. It was safer to keep the cabin cold for a while longer, but the silence in her heart was heavier than the chill. Carter stood at the window, watching the trail where the soldiers had disappeared. He hadn't spoken in over an hour. He hadn't touched his rifle since the patrol left. He just stood there, staring, like a man trapped between two lives. Valari finally broke the silence. "They'll come back." Carter nodded slowly. "Yeah, they will." She looked down at her child, then back at the man who had risked everything for them. "You should leave," she said, her voice low and pained. "You saved us, but if you stay, they'll kill you too." Carter didn't turn around. His voice came quiet but clear. "I'm not going anywhere." Valari blinked, confused. You don't have to do this." Carter turned to face her finally, his eyes tired but steady. "I've lived here alone for years," he said. "Told myself I was healing, but I was just hiding." He stepped forward and knelt beside her. "You and that little one you brought life back into this place." He reached out and gently touched Leo's tiny hand. The child grabbed his finger and didn't let go. "That laugh," Carter whispered. "That smile. It reminded me what it means to care again." Valari's eyes filled with tears. "You would die for us?" "I'd rather die protecting something good," he said, "than keep living with nothing at all." She looked at him for a long moment, then placed her hand on his. A quiet bond formed between them, not rushed, not forced, just real. Two broken souls choosing to stand beside each other. The next few days were spent preparing. Carter reinforced the cabin's walls, buried signal blockers in the ground, and set hidden traps around the edge of the forest. Valari helped with what she could, even teaching Carter how to use certain alien herbs that masked scent and heat. Leo stayed bundled and warm, playing near the fire as they worked together like a family that had always been. At night, they sat close, speaking softly about the past. Valari told him about her home, her people. Her mate, who had died trying to lead a rebellion. Carter shared stories of war, of losing everything, and of the years he spent waiting for. A reason to keep breathing, and somehow their stories fit together. Pain had shaped them, but it hadn't destroyed them, because now they weren't alone anymore. On the seventh night, Carter stood at the edge of the forest. Watching the stars above, Valari joined him. Holding Leo wrapped tightly against her chest, she looked up and whispered, "You could still leave this world. Start fresh somewhere else." Carter smiled, his breath misting in the cold air. "This," he said, motioning to her and the child, "is my fresh start." She smiled softly, leaning into him just enough for warmth. Leo let out a soft sigh and fell asleep against her shoulder. A quiet wind moved through the trees. Not cold this time, but gentle, as if the forest itself had accepted them. Carter looked down at the child and then at Valari. "I don't know what happens next," he said, "but won't let anything take this from us." Valari nodded. "We'll fight together, and from that day forward." The cabin in the woods was no longer just a hiding place. It became a home one built, not from bricks or wood, but from sacrifice, trust, and something far stronger than fear: love. The quiet kind, the kind that grows in silence, in small acts of kindness, in shared danger, the kind that needs no words, just presence. And when the patrols returned weeks later, they found nothing but snow and trees. Because Carter had moved them deeper into the mountains, where scanners couldn't reach, and secrets stayed hidden. There, in a small hidden valley, another cabin rose new, stronger, and full of life. Leo's laughter echoed through the trees. Valari's hands planted alien herbs beside human ones, and Carter smiled more often now. He had chosen to stay, not because he had to, but because his heart had found something worth staying for.